Hey everyone. That was awesome. Thanks for coming along. Just a few sort of pre-announcements and other stuff. If you're not already signed up on the membership platform, please do so. It actually helps us a lot, as well as RSVPing to every event, just so we have a rough idea of the numbers attending and that sort of thing. Because that gets reported all the way up to the top of UK and Ireland, so it makes us look good. Other small announcements, we mentioned it at the end of last week, but there's going to be a hackathon running in December for 1 weekend, known as HACXMAS. There's a load of other unis that are participating in it as well. Southampton, Carlo, Bruno, and a few others, as well as us. The whole idea of the hackathon is to basically get you guys prepared for the solution challenge in the new year. So with that, there's sort of 3 rough tracks that you can build an application for. With that said, you don't actually have to write code. Your actual assessment for the hackathon, so to speak, the actual bit that will be judged, is a pitch at the end. So you can actually get through a whole hackathon without writing code, as long as you sort of concept your idea, say why it solves a problem, sort of propose what the solution is, and that sort of thing. There's 3 rough tracks for this, and again, this will probably feed into the solution challenge, although we don't know what solution challenge is yet. We can take a guess.
It'll probably be roughly that.
Oh dear. But those tracks roughly are healthcare, education, and the environment. Whatever problem you can find in those, you can do. It's nice, it's open, it's general. You can probably also look at other solution challenges to get an idea of what people build and then make something for yourself. We put the link on Discord, by the way, so it's a message.
For the HACXMAS?
Yeah.
It is in the Discord.
I know, it's in for the free.
Oh, is it?
Okay. Next up, just a rough idea of HACXMAS last year. Obviously, we're a brand new club, but GDSE's existed for a bit longer than we have. Students from 10 countries got involved. There were 250 attendees, and the judges were Google developers. I think, again, this year they're mostly Google developers as well. So it's a good opportunity for you to get your work sort of critiqued by actual Google developers. That's pretty neat. Logistics of it, again, you've got to pitch a solution to one of those 3 tracks. If you can't make it fit into those tracks, pick a different problem. In terms of teams, you don't want to do this by yourself. So teams of 2, 3, or 4 with preference to 4. I think they're helping you build teams on their end as well.
So on the so on the Friday first session, you won't actually be sort of doing anything to do with the hackathon itself. It's going to be more sort of team building and getting used to the problem. So it will just be the Friday evening, and you'll get into a big Slack chat with a bunch of people, and there'll be a live stream. And essentially, you'll be getting into teams with potentially students from all over the UK and Ireland.
Yes, again, no code required. You're just going to be assessed purely off your pitch. But with that said, if you want to make something, like a very small demo during that weekend, that's only going to help your overall pitch. So it might be worth doing that. In terms of prizes, top teams from each track, so those 3 tracks I showed earlier, as well as the overall winner, will win actual prizes. Probably just a load of Google swag.
Yeah, Google swag.
The usual care package. Other than that, it's going to be hybrid with a asterisk. We're hoping that we're going to have a room in person unless COVID goes even more south. But for right now, it sounds like we should have a room, but we'll also be on Discord as well as the UK and Ireland Slack channel. There's also going to be other social events that weekend, so I think they're planning on doing a big game of Among Us with other universities and Jackbox and those other things. So it should be a bit more fun. There's some talks by industry experts. I think, Tom, you're doing a talk as well.
I am, yep.
So it'll be a good time overall. Highly suggest you guys sign up. QR code is in the top. So if anyone does want to scan that, go for it. It'll also be around on Discord and probably send an email blast out as well.
Yeah, so I will just add, if you sign up on our chapter page, as of the 10th of December, you'll be sent out a form where you need to fill it in. And then the information for that will be sent out to sort of send the whole hackathon, after which will be sent links and stuff to join stuff.
That's good. But yeah, tickets close December 10th. So whether you have a team or not, if you're interested at all, sign up and we'll sort out teams. after the fact. We just don't want you guys missing out. So make sure you sign up. With that said, 2 weeks ago we had a session on web development. This is sort of the sister to that, which is app development. Whether it's HACXMAS or whether it's a solution challenge, you're probably either going to be making an app or a website. So hopefully this gives you an overview of the other half. I will do most of the session, and then Zach is going to hop in to talk to us a little bit about Flutter midway through. I've lost my projector again. Okay. So, again, sort of 2 halves. We're going to talk about how the app landscape came to be, sort of where we are today, and then we'll look at how we can actually build some apps, and hopefully we're going to have a good amount of time in the second half of the session for you guys to group up and actually hopefully make a working app by the end of the session. Awesome. So in 1989, a man that you might have heard of called Steve Jobs had an idea. Obviously technology wasn't really ready for it, but he said there's probably going to be a way to buy software over phone lines. Obviously, the idea of like an online store didn't really exist, but you reckon you can call someone up and say, hey, I'd like a piece of software. It took a few years, and in that time, the first like real app, as people call it, called Snake, released on the Nokia 6110. There wasn't an app store, but people consider that to be the first app. And it would take another 10 years until the iPhone came out. Apps are fairly new. Obviously, we talked about web a couple of weeks ago. That's existed for a good 30, 32 years now. Apps, a bit more recent. So iPhone released in 2007, and shortly after, we saw the launch of App Store. So, as you guys know, App Store is a marketplace for both free, paid, and these sort of freemium apps. So you get the app for free, you buy a whole load of stuff while you're on the app. So it's increasingly profitable, and as you'll see throughout this presentation, a lot of companies want a piece of that pie, and that's really what drove app development as years have gone on. The App Store originally launched with about 550 apps, so there never really was like one first app. They got a load of developers beforehand and said, hey, do you want to make apps for this thing? It's going to be big, trust us. They were running, but who knew? 2009, interestingly, I noticed Angry Birds on there. This really proved out everything that Apple was selling. They said, hey, you guys can make profit off of free apps. You can make profit off of paid apps. Angry Birds was absolutely huge. I think on the next slide, there was this video where Angry Birds made it all the way up to the International Space Station, and there was millions of sales very quickly. And I checked stats. It had 3 billion downloads by 2015. So if we talk 2009 to 2015, what's that, 6 years of 3 billion downloads? Already Apple is saying, hey, apps are a good idea. And in the background, obviously we're talking about Apple a little bit. Whilst they were sort of the biggest in the space, we can't think about Android, Windows Marketplace, even Amazon has an app store at a certain point. Some of you might remember that, some of you may not. But all that was sort of happening in the background while Apple were very much leading the charge in this space. In 2010, apps had already taken off, so in 3 years, everyone was like, hey, apps, great idea, making us a lot of money. To the point where app became word of the year according to, I think, the Oxford Dictionary. And you can see that search trends for apps peaked at the same time. So more people have been searching for apps then than ever. And it's not really died down since. The graph makes it look a bit more severe than it is. But the boom for apps was really around the sort of 2010 time. At the same time, Apple announced that 300,000 jobs have been made as a result of the iPhone launch. So we're talking not only people that make the iPhone, obviously a lot of jobs there, people that are selling it, but in particular, the market for app developers. Apple actually opening up their ecosystem to an extent and saying, hey, you can make apps, you can publish them on our store, and not only that, we'll help you market them, we'll help you sell them. It became like an actual big thing. There's sort of a revenue share between Apple and app developers, you may know. A bit controversial at times, but actually as time went on, app developers realised that's probably for the best. Shortly after was the first major app acquisition, where where Facebook bought out a company called Instagram for $1 billion. So in 5 years, an app has been built, and as a company, it's already worth $1 billion to Facebook. Obviously, we've seen their master plan since then. Instagram is worth a lot more than $1 billion today. But already in 5 years, we're talking about a major market that is growing extremely quickly. In 2014, for example, just 2 years later, WhatsApp, an app that's being used for communication. So previously we're talking about games, we're talking about maybe watching some YouTube videos, maybe some social media. Now we're talking about communicating. So previously, prior to sort of WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, text calls internationally cost a fortune, but now apps are doing that for free. So apps are not only controlling social media, controlling gaming, apps are now also branching out into people's ways of life. People are depending on apps to exist. Around the same time when WhatsApp was acquired, the BBC started using it to give updates on the Ebola pandemic. So they're not doing that via text, they're not doing that via phone, they're doing that via apps, which again, really solidified this marketplace as something that people want to get on board with. Gmail, as a sort of side note, was the first standalone app to hit 1 billion downloads. So again, that's not a lot of time for apps to get very big and reach lots of people. Again, apps are being used for lifestyles, not just games or social media. You can see just from up here, you've got Ring. Ring doorbells being used to protect houses, same as CCTV cameras. Uber, just being able to get from here to the other side of Portsmouth, we're using apps for that. We are fully dependent on apps at this point, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So that was something that really took off quite quickly. And it's really expanded ever since. I think this slide was taken from what, 2020? As you can see, apps are getting big. So obviously, talk about the marketplace a little bit, but as developers, we're not always too concerned with the business side. We just need to be able to make apps. In all this time, we're focusing mainly on native apps. So unlike the web, where we're building for browsers, and browsers sort of support the technology for us, browsers run on any operating system, any device, with apps we need to care a lot more about the platform that we're developing. So by platform, I mean iOS, I mean Android, I mean Windows Phone, if that still exists. In terms of languages, you're going to have to build the app multiple times for each device. It's a pain, it's more performant, and that's when a language called Swift came along and said, hey, all you guys are doing development in C, in Objective-C, and all these other horrific languages to write in, let's make it somewhat nicer. Swift is now the most popular language for writing iOS apps, and in recent years, Apple have even allowed people on Windows machines to be able to develop using Swift. Previously, if you want to make an iOS app, you needed to write it on an Apple device. So, compared to how weeks ago we talked about how open the web was, app ecosystem and app development has previously been a lot more closed. And a few of the technologies that we're going to talk about in a few minutes have gone a long way to trying to address that. For example, on Android, it was very much the same story. Two major languages were really sort of storming app development. So Java and Kotlin are still the two main languages for Android apps. But you can already imagine that as a developer and as a company, that's a lot of investment if you want to make an app. You've got to have one dev team that are trained in Swift, you've got to have one dev team that are trained in Java. That's a lot of work. And talking of developers, mobile developers, according to Stack Overflow, account for about 15% of all developers, although you can probably estimate that some of these full-end and back-end developers and front-end as well are possibly under that bracket. But if 15% of all developers are mobile and they're having to learn all these languages, might not be the best experience, even if it is the most performant. So, we talked about React a couple of weeks ago. People realized that React, a framework for JavaScript, which is an example from last week, was a pretty good way of making reusable components for the web. What if we tried and use this for apps? We don't need to bother learning Swift, we don't need to learn Java, and we can also just build once and use anywhere. And that's the sort of philosophy behind React Native. You can see here the code is fairly similar. You have a sort of view HTML tag that holds your entire app. So a view might be similar to a screen. And then from there, it's pretty much in plain English. You have an image, you have a text. That text has some style, it's got a certain hex code for the color. Already, this is a much better experience than writing a C-level language or writing Java, which any first years are probably going to out a little grown when I say that. This is already a better experience. And for companies, far, far cheaper. Other benefits of React Native, because it's written in JavaScript, which is one of the most popular languages, a lot of developers already know how to use JavaScript. And a lot of JavaScript and web developers know how to use React. So that's a core advantage. I know that if I want to do app development, I've been doing React for quite a while, I would probably give React Native a go. And that's kind of the sell that Facebook, well, it wasn't even Facebook, developers basing technology off of Facebook for React to make React Native adopted and held. As you may remember, React is a nice big ecosystem, and there's a lot of community involvement, and one of those is called Expo. Expo is a way of running and simulating apps on Android, iOS, and other devices, and you'll see later on today in the tutorial, we'll be using Expo to actually build our apps, but it adds this layer of abstraction and community support that you wouldn't find on other platforms. So it's both an advantage and a disadvantage, depending on how you look at it. But that's how React Native comes to be. Next up, we've got Zach to talk to us a little bit about Flutter.
Alright, Flutter. So, when you first look at Flutter, you might realise that it doesn't use JavaScript or TypeScript like React Native does. It's a completely different language. However, if you look here, I just have the bit of code from last time when we did web. And I just rewrote it in Dart, and the syntax is quite similar. It's a bit different, but to be honest, when using it, you don't really notice, especially because of how the apps are actually made. And that also sort of brings me to the next point, which is when you are developing in Flutter, the Flutter code can be put on the web, Android, or iOS, and it all gets deployed all at the same time. So when I was using it just the other week, I would just be able to click a button, and it would immediately just deploy to Android, iOS, and web, and it would all work seamlessly. Now, something you might realize is that some apps use quite specific things to Android or iOS or the web. They're all a bit different. You know, you can't have like GPS stuff necessarily in a browser that you would on a phone, which is where you can actually still write native code such as Kotlin or Swift, and it will still work by sort of plugging it in to that specific build, and then it will just all sort of work after that. Then you get to the actual code here. So pretty much, it's not that big. It does maybe look a bit scary, but all it really is you just sort of have a class, if you've done anything in Java or even TypeScript, to be honest. And you essentially just make widgets. Yeah, you just make widgets, and those widgets then contain other widgets, which contain more widgets, and what that sort of does is it creates a tree structure, which is quite intuitive to use, and it's quite nice, as well as the fact that you can, this is what I mean about you not really having to learn Dart, because all of it is just like this. When you're making an app, it's mostly just this, with like occasionally if you want a button to do something, you can do whatever that button does, but generally, this is mostly how you actually do the front end of it, and it's quite simple. there's not really much to say about it. There are obviously more things to it when you get into more stateful apps, but that is just the bare bones, and that will just work again on Android, iOS, and also on the web. And then, so you might be asking, why Flutter? Why not just use React? And one thing when I was using Flutter that I did notice is how good the tooling is. So I'm not sure how well you can see that, but in VS Code, which I recommend if you ever use Flutter to use VS Code, because it's so well baked into it, you can just press Control period on your keyboard, and you can just add widgets and it will automatically format the code for you. You see, in Dart, it's common practice to have leading commas on everything, and that also has it so it actually comments what that bracket belongs to, so it makes it a lot easier to read the code, and very, very easy to just use in general. It's also got snippets built into it, which if you ever use snippets, you'll know they're very, very useful. I use them all the time. And just as a nice little thing, when you're using colors and stuff, it just has them, you can't see it in this example, but it just has them near the numbers there. So you can see all the themes and stuff you're using just straight away in your editor without having to look up the hex code. And it's extremely performant. React Native is also, you can see here, isn't quite as fast, at least with this specific benchmark. But Flutter, it actually compiles it all into native code, like machine code. So it doesn't just put it into Java or Kotlin, it just puts it directly into what the processor understands, which makes it incredibly fast, even though it's like, quite a nice language sort of like TypeScript, it's still got massive performance benefits. And obviously you can see that for versus Kotlin and Java. And it also is somewhat similar on iOS, however, not quite as good. And why not Flutter? Because I can't just be all about it. Is the main thing I would say is that Flutter and React Native are both quite new. So there aren't nearly as many packages. You can see here, for Flutter, there's about, 20,000 packages like overall. And then for Swift, this is not nearly close to true, because this is only one thing. But it's got 27,000 packages, and it's a lot more developed, because people have not had nearly as long to develop Flutter things. And 20,000, that's for everything. And yeah. In relation to this, there's also a lot less jobs for Flutter, because Swift, again, has been around for a lot longer, and so is Kotlin. The job market's pretty big for them, whereas Flutter, it would be quite hard to find a job in it right now, because it's mostly just very new sort of startup companies that would generally be using it. And there you go. Pass it over back to Michael.
So, this is actually a very compact view of apps in JAMstack. This is quite a whistle-stop tour. There's a lot more to delve into. One that I do want to quickly hit on, this diagram, I've shown it maybe 4 presentations now. I think it's appeared in every presentation that I've done. We talk about performance a little bit. We're no longer in a world where apps need to be extremely performant, because in a general form, much like we did with web, all the browser's doing is retrieving information and displaying it. In terms of computation and sort of any complex workflows like the ones on this slide, we can offload these to other platforms. And Firebase, the platform that we've been using for all the web stuff, is actually more so designed for apps, for particularly this reason. So the developers can spin up their databases, their functions as a service, any authentication logic, so if you need to use that to log in. You're not really going to write that in Swift if you just picked up Swift for the first time. You're not really going to write auth code at all. So you may as well just pick a serverless service, quicker, faster, cheaper, quicker and faster, nice. Firebase helps massively when it comes to app development. And even though we talked a little bit about React Native being slightly slower than Flutter, I say slightly, quite a bit slower, your user's not going to notice, as a general rule. Unless your app is a game or something really complex, you can probably get away with using something like React Native that you already know if you're already familiar with JavaScript, or picking up syntax like Flutter that is relatively similar to languages that you've already seen. The idea of Flutter and similar languages is that despite you never learning the language before, you can probably write in it purely because it's so similar to what you've already dealt with. And that's a very, very whistle-stop overview. In terms of the presentation, we kept it a lot shorter today because we do want to set a little bit of a challenge. Like I said, we want to spend more time on the build today. So we have two choices. In teams, we'd like you guys to either make a Flutter app or a React Native app. So all gather around one machine, try and make an app of your choice. We have a tutorial for each one. Obviously, we didn't make these if you go further to the rest. The Flutter tutorial, really hands-on. Same goes to the React Native one. Pick one, try them out. You may find a technology that you may want to use for HACXMAS. You may want to find a technology that you want to use for the solution challenge. But now is a good time to experiment in teams, help each other out. I think you've roughly got 2 groups of 4 potentially, or 5, sorry. If you guys are virtual as well, feel free to hop onto Discord, work with each other on that. And that's about it for the presentation today. We'll be around for questions and that sort of thing. Anything else you want to add?
Talking about the HACXMAS.
Or a reminder, HACXMAS exists.
I've just had a lovely conversation with one of the head organisers at HACXMAS for some clarification. With HACXMAS, the deliverable for it is a pitch, and they're saying the minimum to put together is a UX design, and they'll be using tools like Mo's shown you throughout the UX session. But you did say that judges do love demos that they can play with.
Awesome. Thanks for the clarification. Crack on.
Okay.